The call came in at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen a lot in her 15 years on the force, but the trembling voice on the other end of the hospital's emergency line made her blood run cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Please, the voice whispered, barely audible above the background noise of medical equipment. Don't let him find me. He said he'd finish what he started if anyone called for help. The voice belonged to Emma Rose Sullivan, just 8 years old, with strawberry blonde hair and green eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. She was calling from her hospital bed at Saint Augustine Medical Center, her small fingers clutching a phone she'd borrowed from a sympathetic nurse when no one was looking. But Emma wasn't calling the police. She wasn't calling child services. She was calling the one person her late father had told her to trust. If she was ever in real trouble, a man known only as Steele from the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. Before we continue with Emma's story, if you believe that every child deserves protection, that brotherhood means standing up for those who can't defend themselves, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next would remind an entire community that sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they ride motorcycles. Emma's story begins 3 years earlier, when her world was still whole. Her father, Army Sergeant Michael Sullivan, had been everything to her. Protector, best friend, bedtime story reader, and the one person who made her feel completely safe. Michael had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he'd saved the life of a fellow soldier named Marcus Steele Rodriguez during an ambush outside Kandahar. Steele had sworn a blood oath that day, as Michael applied pressure to his wounds under enemy fire. If anything ever happens to me, brother, you watch over my little girl. Promise me. Michael had smiled through the dirt and gunpowder. Nothing's gonna happen to either of us, Steele. We're going home. But sometimes promises are tested in ways we never expect. Michael kept his word about coming home. He survived Afghanistan, left the army, and returned to his daughter and his wife, Linda. For 2 beautiful years, they were a complete family. Emma would sit on her father's shoulders at the local 4th of July parade, waving tiny American flags and laughing as he pointed out all the motorcycles in the veterans' procession. See that big guy with the beard on the Harley, Princess? Michael would say, pointing to Steele. That's Uncle Steele. He's family, even if we're not blood. Remember that name, okay? If Daddy's ever not around and you need help, you find Uncle Steele. Emma would nod seriously, storing the information away like the precious treasure it was. But fate has its own plans. On a rainy Thursday evening, when Emma was 5 years old, Michael Sullivan was killed by a drunk driver 3 blocks from their home. He'd been returning from the hardware store with supplies to fix Emma's broken swing set. The funeral was the first time Emma truly understood what the word forever meant. She stood beside her mother, in a black dress that felt too big, too dark, too final, watching as men in military uniforms folded an American flag with precision and reverence. But it was the bikers who made the strongest impression. 37 motorcycles formed an honor guard as Michael's casket was carried to his final resting place. They wore leather vests with patches that told stories Emma was too young to understand, but their faces were gentle as they removed their helmets and bowed their heads in respect. Steele stood at the front of the formation, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. After the service, he knelt down to Emma's eye level, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he placed them on her small shoulders. "Your daddy was the best man I ever knew, little princess," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And he made me promise something. If you ever need help, if you're ever scared, you call Uncle Steele, okay? Doesn't matter what time it is, doesn't matter what's happening. You call, and I come. That's what family does." Emma nodded, not fully understanding the weight of those words. She was too focused on the pain of losing her father to realize she was gaining something precious, the unbreakable bond of brotherhood that extended beyond blood, beyond death, beyond anything the world could throw at her. For 2 years after Michael's death, Linda Sullivan struggled to raise Emma alone. The life insurance helped with bills, but it couldn't fill the emotional void left by Michael's absence. Linda worked double shifts as a nurse at Saint Augustine Medical Center, often leaving Emma with babysitters or at after-school programs. That's where she met Derek Hamilton. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek was charming, handsome, and patient with Emma's grief. He brought flowers for Linda and small gifts for Emma. He fixed things around the house that had been broken since Michael died. He made Linda laugh again, something Emma hadn't heard in months. The wedding was small, quiet, held in Linda's sister's backyard, with only close family present. Emma, now 7, wore a yellow dress and tried to smile for the photos. Steele sent a card with a $100 bill inside and a note that read, "For the princess. Remember, I'm always here." For the first few months, Derek seemed like the answer to their prayers. He moved into their house, helped with Emma's homework, and even took her to in-session, father-daughter events at school. But gradually, subtle changes began to appear. Derek didn't like Emma's questions during dinner. He got annoyed when she woke up from nightmares about her father. He made comments about her needing to grow up and stop living in the past. When Linda defended her daughter, Derek would apologize, claiming stress from his new job as an insurance adjuster was making him short-tempered. The first time Derek raised his hand to Emma, she was 7.5 years old. She'd accidentally spilled grape juice on papers he'd left on the kitchen table. The slap came so fast, so unexpected, that Emma's first emotion wasn't pain. It was shock. "Derek!" Linda gasped from the doorway, having witnessed the incident. "She needs to learn to be more careful," Derek said coldly, not a trace of remorse in his voice. "In the real world, actions have consequences." Linda comforted Emma that night, promising it would never happen again. But promises are fragile things, and Derek was very good at explaining away his actions, at making apologies that sounded sincere, at gradually isolating Linda from friends and family who might ask uncomfortable questions. The abuse escalated slowly, methodically. A harsh word here, a rough grab there, moments of cruelty disguised as discipline. Derek was careful never to leave marks where teachers might see them. He was smart about timing, striking when Linda was at work or when Emma was already in trouble for some minor childhood transgression. Emma learned to walk quietly through her own house. She learned to anticipate Derek's moods, to read the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes that warned of an incoming storm. She learned to make herself small, invisible, forgettable. But children aren't meant to live like prey animals in their own homes. The breaking point came on a cold February evening. Linda was working a double shift at the hospital, and Derek had been drinking. Emma, now 8, had been watching cartoons when Derek stumbled into the living room and ordered her to turn off the TV. "I need quiet," he slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Can't think with all that noise." Emma quickly reached for the remote, but her small fingers fumbled with the buttons. In her nervousness, she accidentally turned the volume up instead of powering off the television. The explosion of sound triggered something violent in Derek. He grabbed Emma by the arm, his fingers digging into her skin with bruising force. "Are you doing that on purpose?" he snarled, shaking her. "Are you trying to make me angry?" "No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry," Emma cried, frantically pressing buttons on the remote. But Derek was beyond reason. His free hand shot out, striking her across the face with enough force to knock her off the couch. Emma hit the coffee table on her way down, her temple connecting with the sharp corner. The world went gray for a moment. When her vision cleared, Emma tasted copper in her mouth and felt something warm running down the side of her face. Derek stood over her, and for a terrifying moment, Emma saw something in his eyes that wasn't quite human anymore. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Now I have to clean this up before your mother gets home." Emma spent that night in the emergency room of Saint Augustine Medical Center, the same hospital where her mother worked. Derek had driven her there himself. playing the role of concerned stepfather to perfection. She fell down the stairs, he told the triage nurse, his voice heavy with worry. Hit her head on the banister. Scared me half to death. The medical staff was professional, thorough, and unfortunately, accustomed to such explanations. Head injuries in children were common enough, and Derek's story was plausible. He answered their questions with the right mixture of concern and frustration that a good parent might display in such a situation. But Emma knew the truth, and as she lay in that hospital bed, a butterfly bandage covering the gash on her temple and fear gnawing at her stomach like a living thing, she remembered her father's words from so long ago. If Daddy's ever not around and you need help, you find Uncle Steele. The problem was, Emma didn't know how to find him. She'd been so young when her father died, and in the chaos of her mother's remarriage and Derek's increasing control over their household, she'd lost touch with her father's military friends and the biker brotherhood that had meant so much to him. But fate has a way of providing opportunities to those desperate enough to take them. Emma's night nurse was a kind woman named Patricia who had known Linda before Derek entered their lives. Patricia noticed things that others missed. The way Emma flinched when Derek adjusted her blanket, how the child's eyes never left her stepfather's face, tracking his movements like a small animal watching a predator. When Derek stepped out to get coffee from the vending machine, Patricia sat down beside Emma's bed. "Honey," she said gently, "is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all?" Emma stared at the ceiling for a long moment, wrestling with years of conditioning that had taught her to keep Derek's secrets. But sometimes the truth demands to be spoken, even by 8-year-old voices. "My real daddy had a friend named Steele," Emma whispered. "He rode a motorcycle and promised to help me if I was ever scared. But I don't know how to find him." Patricia's expression softened with understanding. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize the signs, and she'd seen enough broken children to know when someone was crying out for rescue. "What's Steele's last name, sweetheart?" "I don't know. Daddy just called him Steele. He's big and has tattoos and a beard." Patricia thought for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Emma, I'm going to help you find Steele. But we have to be very careful, okay? Can you keep a secret?" Emma nodded solemnly. Patricia pulled out her personal cell phone and helped Emma search for motorcycle clubs in their area. It took nearly an hour of careful detective work, but eventually they found a website for the Iron Brotherhood MC, and there, in a group photo from a charity ride, was a familiar face. Marcus Steele Rodriguez, Road Captain, Iron Brotherhood MC. Patricia helped Emma find the club's phone number, but just as they were about to call, Derek's voice echoed from the hallway. He was returning, and there was no time to make the call without being discovered. "Take this," Patricia whispered, slipping her phone into Emma's small hands. "Hide it under your blanket. When he falls asleep, you call that number. Tell Steele that Michael Sullivan's daughter needs help." Emma clutched the phone like a lifeline, her heart hammering in her chest as Derek entered the room with his coffee and his false smile. "How's my girl feeling?" he asked, his voice saccharine sweet for Patricia's benefit. "Better," Emma managed, pulling the blanket higher to conceal the phone. Derek settled into the chair beside her bed, and Patricia excused herself to check on other patients. For the next several hours, Emma lay perfectly still, listening to Derek's breathing, waiting for the moment when exhaustion would claim him. It came at 3:12 a.m. Derek's head lolled back against the chair, his coffee growing cold in his lap, soft snores indicating he'd finally succumbed to sleep. Emma's hands shook as she dialed the number from Patricia's phone, praying someone would answer, praying her father's promise still meant something after all these years. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a gravelly voice answered. "Iron Brotherhood, this is Steele." "Steele?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might wake Derek. "This is Emma. Emma Sullivan. My daddy was Michael Sullivan." There was a moment of silence on the other end of Michael. The line, then Steele's voice, suddenly alert and focused. "Emma? Princess, is that you? What's wrong? Where are you?" The relief in his voice made Emma want to cry. Someone remembered her. Someone cared. "I'm at the hospital," she whispered, glancing at Derek's sleeping form. Saint Augustine Medical Center. My stepdad, he hurt me. And I'm scared he's going to do it again when we go home. Steele's response was immediate and decisive. Don't you move from that hospital, princess. Don't go anywhere with him. Do you understand me? I'm coming to get you right now. But he's my stepdad. The police will make me go with him. No, they won't, Steele said, and there was something in his voice that reminded Emma of her father, that unshakable certainty that came from men who'd seen combat and understood what real protection meant. I'm calling every brother I know. We're going to make sure you're safe, just like your daddy would have wanted. After Emma hung up, Steele sat in his garage for exactly 30 seconds, processing what he'd just heard. Then he reached for his phone and began making calls. The first call went to Hammer, the club's president. The second went to Doc, their vice president and a former Army medic who'd served with both Steele and Michael in Afghanistan. The third went to Patch, their sergeant-at-arms and a man who understood better than most what it meant to protect the innocent. Within 15 minutes, Steele's phone was ringing nonstop as word spread through the Iron Brotherhood network. These weren't ordinary bikers. They were veterans, fathers, men who'd sworn oaths to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Listen up, Steele said into his phone, addressing a conference call that included every active member of the Iron Brotherhood MC. Michael Sullivan's little girl is in trouble. Some piece of garbage she's forced to call stepdad has been hurting her. She's at Saint Augustine Medical Center right now, scared out of her mind. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices overlapped as brothers from across 3 states committed to drop everything and ride. I'm 20 minutes out, growled Hammer. 45 minutes, said Doc. Already on my bike. Hour and a half, but I'm bringing the guys from the Phoenix chapter, announced Tiny, whose nickname was ironic given his 6'8" frame. Steele looked at his watch. 3:47 a.m. We meet in the hospital parking lot at dawn. Full colors, full support. And brothers. His voice carried the weight of shared history and unbreakable bonds. We're not leaving that little girl with anyone who might hurt her. Michael died saving my life. I'll be damned if I let his daughter suffer because some coward wants to take his anger out on a child. As Steele prepared to leave his garage, he stopped at a workbench where he kept a small framed photo. Him and Michael in their army gear, arms around each other's shoulders. Both of them young and convinced they were invincible. Beside the photo was a folded American flag, the one that had covered Michael's casket. I'm coming, brother, Steele whispered to the photo. I'm going to keep my promise. Meanwhile, across the region, the Iron Brotherhood was mobilizing with military precision. These weren't thugs or criminals. They were mechanics and teachers, construction workers and small business owners, men who'd served their country and now served their community. They were fathers who understood that sometimes protecting children meant standing between them and monsters. Hammer called his boss at the construction company and left a voicemail explaining he wouldn't be in due to a family emergency. Doc arranged for another physician to cover his rounds at the veterans clinic. Tiny left detailed instructions for his automotive shop employees and grabbed his cut from the closet. Each man who committed to ride that night understood the potential consequences. Hospitals didn't typically welcome large groups of bikers, especially in the early morning hours. There was a chance the police would be called, that they'd be viewed as troublemakers or potential threats. But they also understood something more important. A little girl had called for help, and she was family. In the Brotherhood, family meant everything. By 5:30 a.m., the first motorcycles began arriving at Saint Augustine Medical Center. Steele led the initial group. 12 bikes rolling into the parking lot as the sun painted the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold. They parked in formation, engines rumbling low, cuts displaying patches that told stories of service, honor, and brotherhood. But they were just the beginning. By 6:15 a.m., the parking lot of Saint Augustine Medical Center looked like something from a movie. Motorcycles filled every available space. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, custom choppers, and touring bikes. They arrived in small groups and large formations. engines creating a symphony of comfy, controlled power that could be heard for blocks. The hospital's security guards watched through the glass doors, unsure whether to call for backup or simply observe. They'd never seen anything like this. Over 200 bikers arriving in coordinated waves, all wearing similar colors, all moving with purpose and discipline. Patricia, the night nurse who'd helped Emma make her phone call, stood at a fourth-floor window watching the arriving motorcycles with amazement. She'd been a nurse for 23 years, but she'd never seen such a response to a child in crisis. Down in the parking lot, Steele organized the Brotherhood with military precision. Groups were assigned to different sections of the lot, maintaining clear lanes for emergency vehicles and hospital staff. Leaders from various chapters checked in with Steele, receiving instructions about behavior, objectives, and the importance of maintaining a peaceful but unmistakable presence. "We're not here to intimidate anyone," Steele announced to the assembled brothers. "We're here to protect a little girl who called for help. We stay calm, we stay legal, and we stay united. Anyone who can't handle that can leave now." Not a single motorcycle moved. Inside the hospital, Derek Hamilton was waking up to what he initially thought was the rumble of thunder. But as consciousness fully returned, he realized the sound was too consistent, too rhythmic. He stumbled to the window and looked down at the parking lot, his blood running cold at what he saw. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, and men in leather vests standing in formation like some kind of army. Derek's mind raced. This couldn't be coincidence. Someone had called them. Someone had told him about last night. His eyes snapped to Emma, who was awake and watching him with an expression he'd never seen before, hope mixed with defiance. "What did you do?" he hissed, grabbing her arm roughly. "Who did you call?" Emma met his eyes without flinching. "I called my Uncle Steele, my daddy's friend, and he came, just like he promised." Derek's face went white. He'd known about Michael's military service, about the biker friends who'd attended the funeral, but he'd assumed those connections had faded over time. He'd gotten careless, overconfident in his control over Emma and Linda. "You listen to me," Derek said, his voice low and threatening. "Those people down there are criminals. Thugs. The police are going to arrest all of them, and then you're coming home with me. And when we get there, you're going to learn what happens to little girls who don't know how to keep their mouths shut." But Emma was no longer the terrified child who'd endured his abuse in silence. Something had awakened in her, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that her father's promise of protection was real and immediate, and currently filling the hospital parking lot with the roar of engines and the strength of brotherhood. "No," she said simply. "I'm not going anywhere with you ever again." Derek raised his hand to strike her, but before he could complete the motion, the door to Emma's room opened, and a mountain of a man in leather and denim stepped inside. Steel filled the doorway like a force of nature. 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and scars, and absolute determination. His beard was streaked with gray, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories of service and brotherhood. On his back, the Iron Brotherhood patch was clearly visible, a screaming eagle with wings spread over crossed swords. "You must be Derek," Steele said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of someone who'd faced down enemies in firefights and back alleys. "I've heard a lot about you." Derek's hand slowly lowered, his survival instincts finally overriding his rage. This wasn't some hospital administrator he could manipulate or some social worker he could charm. This was something else entirely. "I don't know who you think you are," Derek said, trying to summon his usual authority, "but this is my stepdaughter, and I'm taking her home." Steele stepped further into the room, and Derek involuntarily took a step back. "Your stepdaughter? That's interesting, because the way I understand it, you've been using that little girl as a punching bag." "That's ridiculous." She fell down the stairs. Steele's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Yeah, I've heard that story before, usually from men who like to hurt people smaller than themselves." He gestured toward the window. "See all those motorcycles down there? Every one of those riders has the same story I do. We all made a promise to Michael Sullivan to look after his little girl, and we keep our promises." Derek glanced toward the window, then back at Steele. For the first time since he'd entered Emma's life, he was dealing with someone who wasn't intimidated by his badge, his authority, or his carefully constructed facade. "You can't just take her," Derek said, but there was desperation creeping into his voice. "I have legal custody. The law is on my side." "The law?" Steele's expression hardened. "Let me tell you something about the law, Derek. I spent 8 years in the Army, including 2 tours in Afghanistan where I learned what real justice looks like. And it doesn't look like a grown man putting his hands on a child." Emma watched this confrontation with wide eyes, seeing Derek reduced to something small and powerless for the first time in years. The man who had terrorized her was backing down from Uncle Steele like a whipped dog, but Derek wasn't finished yet. He still had cards to play. "I'm calling the police," Derek said, reaching for his cell phone. "This is harassment, intimidation. These people are trespassing on hospital property." "Go ahead," Steele said calmly. "Call them. I'd love to explain to the officers how a little girl ended up in the hospital with a head injury that doesn't match your story about falling downstairs." Derek's fingers hesitated over his phone. He was thinking fast, calculating risks and benefits. As an insurance adjuster, he was good at assessing situations and finding angles, but this scenario was unlike anything he'd encountered. The truth was, Derek had been careful. He'd never left marks where teachers could see them. He'd been strategic about his abuse, measured in his cruelty. But now, faced with someone who understood violence on a professional level, his carefully constructed denials felt flimsy and transparent. "Look," Derek said, changing tactics and adopting a reasonable tone. "I know how this must look to you, but you don't understand the situation. Emma has been acting out since her mother's death. She's been telling stories, making things up for attention. Last night was an accident, and she's blown it all out of proportion." Steele studied Derek for a long moment, taking in the man's body language, his tone, the way he positioned himself in relation to Emma. Steele had interrogated enough prisoners of war to recognize lies when he heard them. "Emma," Steele said, not taking his eyes off Derek, "tell me what happened last night." Emma looked between the two men, years of conditioning warring with newfound hope. Derek's eyes warned her to stay silent, but Steele's presence gave her strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "He was drinking," Emma said quietly. "He told me to turn off the TV, but I accidentally made it louder instead. He grabbed my arm and shook me. Then he hit me, and I fell against the coffee table." Steele's jaw tightened. "Show me your arm, princess." Emma pushed up the sleeve of her hospital gown, revealing finger-shaped bruises in various stages of healing. Some were fresh from the night before, but others were older, faded yellow and green marks that told a story of ongoing abuse. Derek's face flushed. "Those could be from anything. Children bruise easily. They play rough. They fall down. I've seen combat injuries," Steele said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know what deliberate violence looks like. And those marks weren't made by playing or falling downstairs." The room's tension was broken by a knock on the door. Patricia, the night nurse, entered with a determined expression and a small army of backup doctor. Sarah Chen, the attending physician, Margaret Foster, the hospital's social worker, and Detective Robert Martinez from the police department's child abuse unit. "Mr. Hamilton," Dr. Chen said formally, "we need to discuss Emma's medical situation and some concerns that have been raised." Derek straightened, sensing an opportunity to regain control. "Of course, doctor. I've been worried sick about Emma. This man," he gestured at Steele, "burst into my stepdaughter's room, making wild accusations. I was just about to call security." Detective Martinez stepped forward, his badge clearly visible. "Actually, Mr. Hamilton, we'd like to speak with you about Emma's injuries. We have some questions about the incident last night." Derek's confidence flickered. "I already explained everything to the emergency room staff. Emma fell down the stairs. It was an accident." "Yes, we have that report," Detective Martinez said. "But we've also received additional information that suggests there might be more to the story." Margaret Foster, the social worker, moved to Emma's bedside. "Emma, honey, These nice people need to ask you some questions. But before we do that, I want you to know that you're safe here. No one is going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go, Derek interjected quickly. Now wait just a minute. I'm her legal guardian. You can't make promises like that without my consent. Actually, Detective Martinez said, pulling out a document, we can. This is an emergency protective order issued by Judge Patricia Herrera. It places Emma in temporary protective custody pending an investigation into allegations of child abuse. The color drained from Derek's face. This is ridiculous. You can't do this based on the word of some traumatized child and a bunch of bikers. We're not, Dr. Chin said calmly. We're doing it based on medical evidence. Emma's injuries are inconsistent with a fall downstairs. The bruising patterns, the location and severity of the trauma, and the presence of older injuries all point to systematic abuse. Steele had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Derek, you've got two choices here. You can cooperate with the investigation and maybe show some remorse for what you've done. Or you can keep lying and make this harder on everyone, especially Emma. Derek looked around the room, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The authority figures who should have been on his side were questioning his story. The little girl he'd terrorized was being protected by forces he couldn't control or manipulate. But Derek Hamilton hadn't survived 15 years in the insurance business by giving up easily. He was a fighter, and he still had one. More card to play. Fine, Derek said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. That man, he pointed at Steele, and his gang of criminals have been harassing and intimidating my family for months. They've made threats, they've followed us, they've tried to turn Emma against me. And now they've manufactured this whole crisis to justify taking her away. It was a bold lie, delivered with conviction, and just enough truth mixed in to sound plausible. Derek was betting that his word as a respected community member would carry more weight than the accusations of a motorcycle club. Detective Martinez looked at Steele with new interest. Mr. Rodriguez, is there any truth to these allegations? Steele's expression never changed. Detective, until 3 hours ago, I hadn't spoken to Emma since her father's funeral 3 years ago. The first time I ever laid eyes on Derek Hamilton was when I walked into this room 20 minutes ago. But you did bring a large group of bikers to the hospital, Detective Martinez observed. That could be seen as intimidating behavior. Yes, sir, I did, Steele acknowledged. When a little girl calls me at 3 in the morning begging for help, saying she's been hurt and she's afraid to go home, I take that seriously. Every man in that parking lot is here because we gave our word to protect Michael Sullivan's daughter. Patricia stepped forward. Detective, I can confirm that Emma asked for help finding Steele. She was terrified of going home with Mr. Hamilton. That's why I helped her make the phone call. Derek's eyes flashed with rage. You had no right to interfere with my family. I had an obligation to help a child in distress. Patricia replied firmly. The confrontation was interrupted by commotion from the hallway. Voices were raised, and through the open door, they could see hospital security guards talking urgently into their radios. Detective Martinez stepped into the hallway to investigate, returning a moment later with a grim expression. Mr. Rodriguez, he said, it appears your friends downstairs are causing some concern. The hospital administrator is requesting that they disperse. Steele shook his head. They're not going anywhere, Detective. Not until we know Emma is safe. That sounds like a threat, Derek said quickly, sensing an advantage. No, Steele replied calmly. It's a promise. The same promise I made to her father. What happened next would be talked about at Saint Augustine Medical Center for years to come. Dr. Chen made a decision that would define her career. Detective Martinez, I'm formally requesting that Emma remain in protective custody. Her injuries are serious, and I believe she's in immediate danger if returned to Mr. Hamilton's care. Margaret Foster nodded in agreement. I concur with Dr. Chen's assessment. Emma should be placed in emergency foster care while a full investigation is conducted. Derek's composure finally shattered. This is insane, You're destroying a family based on the lies of a confused child and the intimidation tactics of a criminal organization." But his protests fell on deaf ears. Detective Martinez was already making phone calls, setting in motion the machinery of child protection that would ensure Emma's safety. Steele knelt down beside Emma's bed, his massive frame somehow gentle as he took her small hand in his scarred ones. "Princess," he said softly, "your daddy asked me to watch over you. That means making sure you're safe, that no one hurts you anymore. These nice people are going to take care of you while they figure out the best place for you to live. And I'm going to be right here, making sure nothing bad happens to you ever again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. But for the first time in years, they were tears of relief rather than fear. "Will I see you again, Uncle Steele?" "Every day, if you want," Steele promised. "We're family, remember? And family sticks. Together." Through the window, they could see the parking lot full of motorcycles, 200 brothers maintaining their vigil. Word had spread through social media and local news outlets. Reporters were arriving, drawn by the unprecedented sight of an entire motorcycle club standing guard over a hospitalized child. The story was already taking on a life of its own. Number Protect Emma was trending on Twitter. Local news stations were setting up cameras. The hospital's phone system was overwhelmed with calls from people offering support. But inside room 412, the only thing that mattered was an 8-year-old girl who was finally safe. Derek made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I have rights. I have lawyers. I'll fight this in court." Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Mr. Hamilton, you're under arrest for child abuse. You have the right to remain silent." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, passing through a jubilant, different sign rider, hospital corridor lined with staff members who'd learned Emma's story, Steele remained by her bedside. He'd kept his promise to Michael Sullivan. He'd protected the princess when she needed it most. Over the next several hours, the Iron Brotherhood maintained their presence at the hospital. They organized shift rotations to ensure someone was always watching over Emma. They coordinated with hospital security to maintain order and prevent any interference with the medical staff's duties. Dr. Chen was amazed by their organization and discipline. "I've never seen anything like this," she told Steele during one of their conversations. "You've created an atmosphere of safety around that child that's allowing her to heal in ways we couldn't achieve with medicine alone." Steele nodded. "That's what brotherhood means, Doc. We take care of our own." Margaret Foster worked with Steele to arrange temporary guardianship. It turned out that Steele had been more than just Michael's battle buddy. He was Emma's godfather, legally designated in Michael's will as her preferred guardian should anything happen to both parents. The paperwork had been filed years earlier, but forgotten in the chaos following Michael's death and Linda's remarriage. "Your friend thought of everything," Margaret told Steele as they reviewed the documents. "He really loved his daughter. Michael was the best man I ever knew," Steele replied. "Emma is lucky to have him as a father, even now." As evening approached, the media attention intensified. News vans filled the streets around the hospital. Reporters interviewed bikers, hospital staff, and community members who'd heard about Emma's story. The narrative that emerged was powerful and clear. A little girl had called for help, and her father's brothers had answered that call. 200 motorcycles had descended on the hospital not to cause trouble, but to ensure that a child's cry for protection was heard and honored. Steele gave one interview, standing in the parking lot surrounded by his brothers, speaking directly to the cameras with Emma's permission. "People see motorcycles and leather, and they make assumptions," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "But we're fathers, grandfathers, veterans, teachers, mechanics. We're people who understand that protecting children isn't just a job for police or social workers. It's a responsibility for every adult in the community." He paused, looking back at the hospital where Emma was finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Michael Sullivan died, serving his country. Before he deployed, he asked his brothers to watch over his little girl if anything ever happened to him. "We failed her for 3 years, and that's on us. But when she called for help, when she remembered her daddy's promise, we answered, and we'll keep answering as long as she needs us. The reporter asked, "What's next for Emma?" Steele's expression softened. "Next, she gets to be a little girl. Again. She gets to feel safe, to laugh, to not be afraid when she hears footsteps in the hallway. She gets to remember that her daddy loved her, and that love doesn't die just because someone does." 6 months later, Saint Augustine Medical Center held its annual children's charity ride. Motorcycles filled the parking lot once again, but this time they were there for celebration rather than crisis. Emma Sullivan Rodriguez. She'd legally taken Steele's last name when the adoption was finalized. Stood on the hospital steps wearing a pink helmet and a child-sized leather vest with Iron Brotherhood Princess embroidered on the back. Her smile was radiant, her laughter genuine, her eyes bright with the confidence that comes from knowing you're truly loved and protected. Steele lifted her onto his Harley, making sure her helmet was properly secured before climbing on himself. Behind them, 200 motorcycles revved their engines in preparation for the charity ride that would raise money for the hospital's child protection program. Dr. Chin approached them before they departed. "How's our girl doing?" "Money," she asked, genuinely caring about Emma's well-being. "She's perfect," Steele replied, his voice heavy with pride. "Started 3rd grade last month. Made honor roll. Joined the chess club and the soccer team. She's sleeping through the night, laughing at cartoons, and asking for a puppy. Sounds like a normal 8-year-old, doctor." Chin observed with a smile. "That's all we ever wanted for her," Steele said. Emma piped up from her seat behind him. "Uncle Steele says we might get a dog for Christmas. A big one that can protect our house. Any dog that lives with Steele Rodriguez is going to be the safest dog in the state." Dr. Chin laughed. As they prepared to leave, Patricia approached them. The nurse who had helped Emma make that crucial phone call 6 months earlier had become something of a hero in the hospital, receiving recognition for her quick thinking and compassion. "Emma," Patricia said, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You were so brave that night." Emma hugged Patricia tightly. "Thank you for helping me call Uncle Steele. You saved my life." "No, sweetheart," Patricia replied. "You saved your own life. You had the courage to ask for help when you needed it." The charity ride proceeded through downtown, a river of chrome and leather that drew cheers from sidewalks and waves from children in passing cars. Emma waved back enthusiastically, no longer the terrified child who had hidden bruises under long sleeves. Derek Hamilton had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for child abuse and was facing additional charges related to the suspicious death of Emma's mother. The investigation that began with Emma's phone call had uncovered a pattern of violence and control that spanned years. Emma's mother's death was being reinvestigated as a potential homicide. New evidence had emerged, suggesting Derek had tampered with Linda's car, causing the accident that had left him as Emma's sole guardian and beneficiary of Linda's life insurance policy. But those dark chapters were behind them now. Emma lived with Steele in a house filled with laughter, motorcycle magazines, and the kind of constant, unconditional love that her father would have wanted for her. Steele had modified his lifestyle significantly to accommodate his new role as a single father. The garage that had once been his sanctuary became Emma's art studio. The spare bedroom was transformed into a princess palace complete with pink walls and a canopy bed. His riding schedule was adjusted around school events, soccer games, and parent-teacher conferences. The Iron Brotherhood had embraced their new role as surrogate uncles and grandfather figures. Doc taught Emma how to change the oil in Steele's Harley. Hammer built her a tree house in the backyard. Tiny, despite his intimidating size, turned out to be excellent at braiding hair and helping with homework. Emma flourished in this environment of protection and love. The nightmares that had plagued her during Derek's abuse gradually faded. Her grades improved. She made friends at school. She learned to ride a bicycle, to swim, to believe in herself again. Most importantly, she learned that the promise her father had made was unbreakable. Steele had kept his word, and so had the Brotherhood. They had proven that family wasn't just about blood. It was about loyalty, love, and the willingness to stand up for those who needed protection. As the charity ride concluded back at the hospital, Emma stood with Steele at the same window where she had first seen 200 motorcycles arriving in response to her desperate phone call. "Uncle Steele," she said, "do you think Daddy knows what happened? Do you think he knows you kept your promise?" Steele knelt down to her level, his eyes serious but warm. "Princess, your daddy was the best soldier I ever served with. He understood that some promises are sacred, that some bonds can't be broken by time or distance or even death. He knew that if you ever needed help, his brothers would answer the call." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we visit his grave this weekend? I want to tell him about my soccer goal last Tuesday." "Of course we can," Steele replied. "We'll bring flowers, and you can tell him all about school and your friends and that A+ you got on your science project." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Emma turned back for one last look at room 412, where her new life had truly begun. The room where she had found her voice, called for help, and learned that sometimes angels wear leather jackets and ride motorcycles. The Iron Brotherhood had kept their promise to Michael Sullivan. They had protected his little girl when she needed it most, and they would continue to protect her, guide her, and love her as she grew into the strong, confident woman her father had always dreamed she would become. Emma's story became legend in their community, a reminder that courage can come from the smallest voices, that help can arrive in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most intimidating appearances hide the gentlest hearts. 200 bikers had answered one little girl's call for help, but in the end, they discovered that she had helped them too, giving them purpose, meaning, and the chance to honor a fallen brother by protecting his most precious legacy. The rumble of motorcycle engines faded into the distance as the Iron Brotherhood rode toward home, carrying with them the satisfaction of a promise kept and a child saved. And in the passenger seat of Steele's pickup truck, because 8-year-olds can't ride motorcycles on busy highways, Emma Sullivan Rodriguez smiled and planned her thank you speech for the next Iron Brotherhood meeting. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. If Emma's story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of brotherhood and protection. In the comments below, write "promise kept" if you believe that some bonds are unbreakable, that real family extends beyond blood, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who show up when it matters most. Remember, there are children like Emma in every community, waiting for someone to hear their call for help. Maybe you can't mobilize 200 motorcycles, but you can listen, you can care, and you can make sure that no child's voice goes unheard. Thank you for watching. And never forget, promises matter, brotherhood is real, and sometimes the difference between despair and hope arrives on two wheels with the roar of engines and the strength of loyalty. Until next time, keep riding toward justice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.